In this video, I'll go through the biggest mistakes that beginner pastel artists make and how to avoid them. I'm Kirsty Rebecca and I make drawing and painting tutorials that are easy to follow even if you're just starting out. And these are mistakes that I made when I first started with pastel, so I thought I'd share them with you so you don't have to make the same mistakes. The drawing you'll see clips of while I talk to you about these mistakes is of an eagle eye study using pastel pencils. The first mistake is using the wrong type of pastels for the style that you want to achieve. There are so many different types of pastels out there for artists to use, and the main two types are soft pastels and oil pastels. I mainly use soft pastels, so that's what I'll be talking about in this video. Soft pastels come in a bunch of different types as well, like soft pastel sticks like Rembrandt or Unison or Sennelier, harder pastels like Conte or Prismacolor NuPastels, and pastel pencils, which are made by a variety of brands like Faber-Castell, Derwent, Stabilo, and Caran d'Ache, and there's also pan pastels. If you want to create realistic or photorealistic drawings, you want to use pastels that give you fine details like pastel pencils. You can always do base layers with different types of pastels like pan pastels or soft pastel sticks, but you want to be careful using those as base layers because you don't want to add too much pastel in your first layer because it will be harder to add those pastel pencils on top. Soft pastel sticks or pan pastels by themselves are better suited to more expressive styles where you don't have to have fine details or as much control over your pastels, or for larger works where you're working big enough to get that amount of detail with the sticks or the pans. The second mistake is using the wrong paper. When I first started, I used a paper that was labelled as pastel paper, which is what most people do, but the result was very grainy looking and I couldn't layer my pastels on top of each other to create fine details or more depth in my artwork. And that's because not all paper labelled as pastel paper is created equally. I would highly recommend switching to Clairefontaine Pastelmat or a sanded paper. This example shows the top layer done on Pastelmat and the bottom row is on a generic paper labelled as pastel paper. Pastelmat allows you to add more layers than generic paper will, and it also allows you to create a nice smooth result without the graininess showing through. Pastelmat is quite a bit more expensive than generic papers, but it's 100% worth the cost in my opinion. I wouldn't work on any other pastel paper now that I've tried Pastelmat. It just doesn't get the same results when I use another paper. The Pastelmat also stops a lot of the dust fall off which you get with the generic papers because it grips the pastel a lot better, which is a positive for when you're framing your work, and there's less mess when you're working as well. And I would also recommend using a toned paper rather than white. When you're working on white paper, you obviously can't add white pastel on top because it won't show up, so you kind of end up working around the white areas, which isn't really a natural way to work. But when you work on a mid-tone colour, you can add your light colours and your dark colours, which makes it a bit easier to work on because you don't have to work around those light areas or preserve them, you can just use white pastel. It will also mean that there won't be any white grain of the paper showing through. If you use a toned paper, it won't be as obvious if there are some parts of the paper showing through towards the end because it won't really be as bright as the white would be. So you can use the mid-tone paper to your advantage that way and make it look like part of the drawing. The third mistake is sharpening your pastel pencils too often or sharpening them the wrong way. The thing about pastel pencils is that they're much softer than coloured pencils or graphite pencils. When you sharpen them, they tend to crumble and break really easily. It's unrealistic to have a super sharp point on your pencil for your entire project, and honestly, you don't really need to have a really fine point. My pencils are barely ever sharpened to a fine point throughout the process, even though I get quite a realistic result. Some people use manual crank handle sharpeners, which do work quite well, and I've used the Derwent Superpoint and the Swordfish sharpeners in the past to get fine points, but the problem is that the blades tend to get blunt very quickly. You can run a woodless graphite pencil through your sharpener to help keep the blades sharper for longer, but I still find that the blades become blunt within a few months anyway. You can buy replacement blades in some countries, but here in Australia I can't seem to find any that are a reasonable price. But when you do sharpen them in a pencil sharpener, you end up sharpening away a lot of your pastel pencil as well, so it can be quite wasteful. So the way that I sharpen my pastel pencils is by shaving away the wooden casing on the outside of the pastel, and I just use it like that for 99% of my project. And you can rotate your pencil as you work to help keep the point sharper for longer, which will help a lot as well. If I do need a finer point, like if I'm signing the piece or if I'm working on like whiskers on a smaller subject, I'll sharpen it further by using sandpaper, and you can buy that from an art store or from a hardware store. So when you work with pastels, you won't be able to get the same level of detail as you do with coloured pencils, but to make something look realistic doesn't mean that you need more detail. That's not what makes something look realistic. It's actually the values that's more important. If you take a step back from your artwork and it looks realistic from a normal viewing distance, then you don't really need to have those super fine details anyway, in my opinion. The point that you get from sharpening your pastel pencils with the craft knife is actually a sharp enough point to get all of the details that you need. And if you really want those really tiny, crisp, fine details, I'd probably recommend working larger so that the details look smaller, or using another medium like coloured pencils or oils or acrylics. The fourth mistake is transferring your outline using the wrong method. And this may sound like a weird mistake to include, but hear me out. If you usually transfer your outline to your paper using transfer paper, a lot of those are usually graphite based, and the thing about using graphite underneath pastel drawings is that it can create like a slippery surface which your pastels don't stick to very well. So the pastels tend to slide over the graphite lines, and it can leave lines in your unfinished drawing. And this is the same if you just use graphite pencils to draw your outline in as well. So whether you freehand your drawings or trace from a reference photo, these are the two ways that I would recommend getting your outline down. First of all, if you're freehanding or sketching out your outline yourself, then do it on a separate piece of paper first. And then the first way to get your outline down onto your surface is by using a projector. So you can either take a photo of your sketched outline and project that, or just project your reference photo onto your surface and then use a pastel pencil to draw out your line. And that way your pastel pencil strokes will blend in with the rest of your pastel. I just use a really cheap projector that was intended for watching movies while camping and things like that, and it was probably less than $50, so it's super pixelated, but I only really use it to get the general shapes down, not really any of the details. You can buy art projectors that are fantastic as well if you have some more money to spend. But the second option is a much cheaper way. So you can take your freehand drawing or your printed reference photo and then rub pastel onto the back of that. You can use pan pastels for this, or soft pastel sticks, or even pastel pencils if you don't have the first two. And then turn your reference the right way and trace over your outline onto your pastel mat or sanded paper. So this pushes the pastel that's on the back of your reference photo onto your paper, and you'll get a nice accurate outline that way that was created using pastel, which will blend in with your further layers. Before I move on to the next tip, if you want to follow along with my longer real-time tutorials where I talk you through every step of the process, then Patreon might be the solution for you. For a small amount per month, you'll have access to every tutorial that I've previously uploaded on your chosen tier level in a variety of mediums like pastel, coloured pencil, graphite, watercolour and more. You will also have access to the original reference photo, a traceable outline, and a list of supplies that I'm using, so you really can follow along every step of the way. My tutorials don't skip any stages or cut out any important parts of the process, and I will share all of my secrets to help you improve. Every month, I will upload brand new tutorials to the library so you can grow and develop your drawing and painting skills and take your art to the next level. You can also join in on our members chat group where you can ask questions or advice or share your artwork and talk to other members in the Patreon community. The link is in the description if you want to check it out. The fifth mistake is not working in layers. If you're trying to get a realistic result, then layering is essential. A lot of people see pastel artists who work in expressive styles just lay 1 or 2 layers of pastel sticks down and then they're done. But if you want a more realistic result, you'll want to work in layers. So try not to think about it as a paint by number where you're applying the right colour in the right spot. You want to think about it as doing a base layer of a mid-tone colour and then a texture layer and then some details on top. Especially if you're working with fur or hair, you really need to build up those layers to create the illusion of the right texture and depth of the fur. Which brings me to my 6th mistake, which is not blending your pastel between layers. So you can blend your layers with your finger, a cotton tip or a blending stump, but make sure that you blend in between each layer of pastel. This will help you create a smoother result because you're blending out the graininess of the pastel between each layer. It will also help you add more layers onto your paper. Even if you're working on pastel mat or a sanded paper, there will still be a limit to how many layers you can add. So by pushing the pigment into your paper, you'll leave some of the grooves of the paper for more layers of pastel to stick to. Blending the pastel also means there'll be less dust falling off of your work. And on the topic of layering, the 7th mistake is adding too many layers. So even if you do blend between each layer, there will still be a point where you can't add more layers because you've filled up the grooves of your paper. When you first start out, it can be a bit harder to know how much pastel you can lay down before your paper won't let you add any more. But the more pieces of artwork that you do, the easier it will be to work out whether you've got too much pastel down or not. The solution to this is just to practice. You can do test pieces on a separate piece of paper and see how many layers you can add and what happens when the grooves of the paper get filled up. The 8th mistake is spending too much on a huge set of soft pastel sticks to start with. When I first started, I bought a huge set of expensive Rembrandt sticks because I thought I needed all of the different colours because you can't really blend pastels very easily. Well, I was wrong. I've used that set maybe 5 times and I almost regret buying it. You can actually blend pastels if you have the right pastels. I would highly recommend investing in a set of 5 pan pastels, a red, a blue, a yellow, a white and a black, because you can mix any colour that you like, just like paints. The set of pan pastels comes in nearly 100 colours, but you can mix nearly all of those colours using the 5 pans. And if you have a little bit more money to spend, you can get the set of 10 or set of 20 base colours and then mix your colours from there as well. I'll leave a link in the description of a tutorial I made that shows you exactly how you can mix those 5 colours and also shows you how you can create 2 simple landscapes with those colours as well. Pan pastels can be quite expensive, but when you buy 5 colours, it's way less expensive than buying full sets of pastel sticks, especially considering you can mix any colour that you need. So if you're first starting out, I'd just recommend getting the set of 5 pan pastels or the set of 10 or 20 if you can afford it. And then invest in the largest set of pastel pencils that you can afford to add those finer details in. The playlist on the screen has more pastel tutorials that I thought you might find useful, so click on that and I'll see you over there.